freaking first cut. Golly.
Welcome to the First Cut Podcast. I'm Greg DuCharme with you this evening, breaking down the DFS board here for Colonial Country Club and the Charles Schwab Challenge, and helping me do it as he's here every single week. It's been a while since I've been around on the DFS episode. It's Sia Nejad. Sia, what's going on?
I'm so excited to be doing a show with you, Greg. They took us away from each other, but they couldn't take us away from each other for too long. You're back. PGA Championship was super interesting. I mean, Greg, it was so, I'm sure you guys did this in the wrap-up show yesterday, but it was just so dynamic, so many different storylines. Of course, Brooks, Michael Block. There was just so much going on. I had a live outright that I was talking to Troy about before the show. When Brooks was about 7 back after Thursday, I live bet him at 46-1. So that worked out really well. And then DFS, I was actually pretty good. I had a couple missed cuts that hurt me, but the 5 out of 6 lineups ended up cashing pretty good. So I'm just, let's go. The cool thing is, man, Greg, after a major, it's like, okay, let's go. Pricing's out on Monday. Like, there's no hangover, right? It's just, let's go.
There's no time. We got to get right back into it. And that's what we're here for. And the really cool thing about this week at the Charles Schwab as well is it's not a designated event, but it's quite a field. Mm-hmm. It's the best field I can remember in a long time of a non-designated event. Since before they really got going, where you had designated events seemingly every other week. So this is going to be a really fun one, and it's a really fun golf course to break down, which is where I'd like to start tonight, Sia, because Colonial Country Club is a classic. We've been coming here on the PGA Tour since 1946. It's been a long time. It's a classic golf course, and it always gives us a great tournament. I mean, you see occasionally like Justin Rose reach 20 under, but typically you're seeing winning scores around, 13, 14, 15 under par, and it provides a really nice challenge for the player. So with your initial look, what do you make of this golf course?
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned Justin Rose's name, because he's a guy that I'm not normally on that I do like this week. So we'll talk about that when we get to the 9K range. But so this is an interesting course because, Greg, and I want you to sort of be the authority here, but here's my opinion. I mean, you definitely want to be accurate, but I don't know that we want to exclude the guys who are not very accurate, who are maybe the longer bombers that people might tend to think, well, maybe this isn't the tournament for them. And we saw it last year with Sam Burns. We know how good Jordan Spieth has been here historically. So I kind of think everybody's included. But with that said, distance and off the tee, it's not as big of an emphasis for me this week. It's something I'm looking at, but it's not a big emphasis for me this week. It's weighted approach. You can go on rickrungood.com and do the weighted stuff. I mean, I really like doing that. Weighted approach, weighted tee to green. Those are the things I'm really looking for, especially in the non-designated events. I think that sort of weighted stuff is really going to matter. But the short game matters too, particularly putting. I don't usually look at putting, but I'm definitely going to be taking a longer look at putting this particular week. That's pretty much it. So weighted approach, weighted tee to green, greens in regulation. Those are the main things I'm looking at outside of putting and around the green.
We look at rickrungood.com and his model for correlation, and see, it definitely speaks to that. There are a lot of really important metrics and statistics when it comes to your approach play. You have proximity to the hole in there, fairway proximity. You have a number of different distance metrics, basically from 100 to 200 yards is really heavily included. It seems like this is the kind of golf course where outside of 200 is a little less important. Mm-hmm. But in that 100 to 200 range, mid short irons becomes really important. As for off the tee, Sia, I think it's important, but I think there are a couple ways where there are different styles that can work. So you saw Sam Burns, a long hitter, and Scotty Scheffler was the runner-up, another really long hitter last year. You had Jason Kokrak, who took the place apart with the driver. But he was able to cut a lot of corners and still find a lot of fairways. I mean, what he did was incredible. He led the field in driving distance and was fourth in driving accuracy. So that kind of thing works everywhere. But there's definitely still this notion that some of the more accurate hitters, guys who keep the ball within the trees, will have a lot of success. So I'm putting a lot of attention, like I do every week, in approach play, but I'm looking at guys who have an ability, one or the other, or both, with the driver. So I still think strokes gained off the tee is important. And putting in the model, putting's probably more important than I have it. There's only 9 courses where strokes gained putting is more important on the PGA Tour than this. So it's definitely going to be a factor. You have anything when it comes to scoring? Any specific scoring stats you're looking at?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, this isn't one of those courses, Greg, where we're going to see. I mean, you mentioned Justin Rose when he knocked it out of the park, but I mean, I would expect and it's weather dependent to some degree, but I would expect the scores to be in the, I don't know, 11 under to 15 under range. So when it comes to scoring, sometimes I look at it in the really scoreable sort of birdie fest. Sometimes I'll look at kind of easy courses and I'll look at DK scoring or birdies are better. I think it's fine to look at that. But I got to tell you, I've been doing pretty well over, I would say, this calendar year. And a lot of times I'm sort of trying to encompass some of those scoring stats in some of the other sort of more global stats, like weighted tee to green or sometimes greens in regulation. I know you can look at stuff like opportunities gained and things of that nature, but the tee to green stuff, the approach stuff, that to me, that's another way of looking at the scoring stats, especially if you factor in the putting. So no, I'm not looking at any of those, but I don't begrudge anybody who does.
Right. I think opportunities gained is a really interesting one. But oftentimes on a golf course where it's not a birdie fest, strokes gained approach or weighted strokes gained approach can really tell that story as well. Mm-hmm. You're looking for guys who are going to or have the potential to fill it up on the greens. And if they do, then all of a sudden you have a winning formula. But because putting's so variable, well, you really lean heavily on how many opportunities are they getting. And I think that can be found a lot in weighted strokes gained approach as well. So it seems like we're on the same page. Just like many weeks on the PGA Tour, approach play is going to be really important. Maybe a little bit more emphasis on the shorter approach distances and maybe a little bit more off the tee. But we are going to get into all of our different pricing ranges here. We'll start with the 10K range. But first, we're going to take a quick break and hear a word from our partners.
Phenomenal! Absolutely magisterial here!
And we're back. Okay, let's start off with, as we typically do, with our 10K plus range. And we have in this range Scotty Scheffler at 11,500. Then we have a little bit of a drop off here, Sia. You got Tony Finau at 10,700. You got Victor Hovland, 10,600. Colin Morikawa at 10,400. And Max Homa at 10,100. It seems to me like there's a place up at the top of this that's really hard to get away from. But I know you love a contrarian play. So where do you go this week? Do you have to have Scotty Scheffler in your lineup?
Probably. I mean, so it's a really good way to phrase that, because when it comes to the contrarian play, you don't necessarily want to get contrarian at the top of the board if you believe somebody at the top of the board is going to win. What I love about this particular tournament is the pricing is completely off. You can look at guys in the 6,200, 6,300 range, and you could have said to yourself before you actually saw the pricing, oh, that guy's going to be 7,100. That guy's going to be 6,800, 7,300, whatever the case may be. So my point in bringing that up is that there's a lot of players that you can pivot off of in that 7K range, in the 6K range, even in the 8 and 9K range to sort of make your lineup different and to, quote, eat the chalk that Scotty Scheffler might be. He might end up being, Greg, I'm speculating completely, but I would imagine once lineups lock on Thursday, people are they're going to see so much value in the lower ranges. They're just not going to be able to get away from Scotty Scheffler because it's hard to get away from him. And we could go through the metrics. Of course, they're amazing. What's so amazing, though, is how much better he is. So if you look at the last 24 rounds, he's a full 1.5 strokes better weighted tee to green than any other player in this field. That's 24 rounds. It's a smaller sample size. By the way, if you do 36, I'm sure it'll be a very similar number and you can go from there. By the way, number 2 there would have been Victor Hovland, but he's also number 1 greens in regulation, number 3 in accuracy, if you want to promote that, 2nd in weighted approach, 2nd here last year. The only argument you could possibly make is that he's been in contention a couple tournaments in a row, and this is his third tournament in a row, which to me isn't really an argument because, by the way, he took 3 weeks off before he started this 3-tournament stretch. So he hasn't captured a win. This is probably his, certainly his last opportunity in the Texas swing to grab one. So I like Scottie Scheffler a lot. If I'm giving like sort of a silver medal to somebody in terms of this 10K range, it's probably Tony Finau. I'm not really a Tony Finau guy, but he's got great history here. If you like the lesser field narrative, well, here's Tony Finau for you. Number 3 weighted tee to green last 24 rounds, number 3 weighted approach, 5th in greens in regulation, and 2 top 5s over his last 4 at Colonial, just going back to the history. So it's those 2 for me. I'll tell you, though, this price on Scottie, it's just not high enough, Greg, because you can fit Scottie in, especially with what I said at the beginning, with the pricing being so kind of erratic and random. You can play Scottie, you can play another expensive guy and still make your 6, put your 6 guys in there and be pretty comfortable with it.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, there are some guys, we'll talk about it when we get down to the 6K range, but I'm always wondering when I look at that range, how low will I go? And that often determines what I do up top. Because with so many of these great players and a lot of these great fields, we're left with kind of a coin flip. You know what? Their metrics are great, and it's who's gonna is this a Scheffler week or a Rahm week? Well, in this case, we only have Scottie Scheffler, and he hasn't finished outside the top 12 since October, and he's the most reliable player that I can remember because. What he does tee to green is just incredible. You know, the accuracy combined with the distance. Well, he can cut the corners and he can hit the fairways. He's one of the best iron players on the PGA Tour. He hits a ton of greens, and he has a great short game. The one area you may worry about is the putting. Is he going to make enough putts? But like you were saying, see, 11 to 15 under par, Scottie Scheffler can get there without putting very well.
Yeah, that's the thing.
Right.
That's the thing about elite players is even when they're not putting perfectly, and you can put Victor Hovland in that category too. He hasn't been the best putter over the last 24 rounds. Certainly Colin Morikawa was in that conversation too, but the elite players are giving themselves so many opportunities that they can lose with the putter and still sort of dominate the field.
Yeah. So I think your point here on Scheffler and Finau is very well founded. I'm a little worried with Hovland about the emotion of being so close and playing so well and having kind of a heartbreaking moment. I wouldn't be surprised if we saw kind of an exhale week here at the Charles Schwab, even though I think he's a great course fit. The only other guy that I'd really throw in there who I'm interested in is Colin Morikawa. The plague on him so far this year has been the putting. He's been very consistent tee to green. He's a very accurate hitter of the ball. He came in second here, and honestly, in 2020, gave this tournament away. I think this is a great fit for Morikawa, who gained strokes putting in kind of a rare occasion last week. I wouldn't be surprised if he was building towards something too.
Yeah, and to your point, he's probably going to be relatively low owned. So it's a nice sort of DFS pivot. So I think he is one of many great pivots off of Scottie Scheffler. I mean, I guess you could try to put them both in your lineup and see what happens. But I also think that you can fade this 10K range. And I know that sounds crazy, but if you're not going to play Scottie Scheffler, I think you could make a reasonable argument that you can start in the 9K range as low as like a Justin Rose and just make this perfectly balanced lineup between, let's say, the 7,500 and 9,300 range. So I built a lineup like that. I actually dipped down to, I believe, 7,100, but everybody, so it started with Justin Rose, and then it basically had all 8K guys in there, one high 7K guy and one low 7K guy. And I was really happy with that lineup. So if you think Scottie Scheffler can stumble, and if you're just not fully bought into the notion that a Colin Morikawa or Tony Finau are going to win this tournament, then you can build that balanced lineup and get that 6 for 6, hopefully, and maybe have some guys that are inside the top 5 down the stretch. Just a thought.
So let's get to that 9K range, because it's, the 10K range, we got some big names in there like we just discussed, but the 9K range is really no shortage either. You have Jordan Spieth at 9,900, Sam Burns, who obviously won here last year. He's at 9,700. You have Sung Jae Im at 9,500. Justin Rose, who you have started a lineup with, at 9,300. Tommy Fleetwood at 9,200. Chris Kirk at 9,100. And Siwoo Kim rounds it out at 9,000 flat. So this is still a lineup with some players who are either big names or have been playing some really good golf of late. Is your starting point in this range Justin Rose, or is there somewhere else you'd like to go as well?
It's funny because I'm the 9K guy, Greg. You remember I'm the 9K guy.
Yeah,
I looked at this.
You got an I Heart 9K T-shirt. Right?
How have we not made that with the First Cut Pods logo? Like, we got to do something about that.
That is a great idea.
I'm just saying, like a whole list of shirts we could make, Greg. Not just ones for me, but I looked at this 9K range, Greg, and I was like, I don't like it. I could see myself completely skipping this range, like starting with Scotty and going right to the 8Ks, which, by the way, would make sense if you're going to take an 11.5 guy. But upon further review, there are a few names that I do. First of all, it's not that I hate any of these names. It's just comparatively to some of the guys I like in the 8K and the 7K range, and then, of course, the range we just talked about, I just wasn't in love with anybody. I mean, I'll start with Jordan Spieth. I get really nervous about anybody who's, quote, coming off of an injury. And maybe it wasn't an injury in the first place. Like, I don't know that anybody's addressed this, Greg, but maybe he didn't have a wrist injury and he just didn't want to play that non-designated event in Texas. And being that it was in Texas, he just was like, oh, my wrist is sore. Like, I don't know. Cause the tournament prior, he actually he was very bad. And like, it looked like maybe he was shaking off an injury, but he played just fine last week. But with that said, I don't know where he's at with that. And in this particular event, I don't want to gamble with a potential of in the second or third round, like he's just not giving it his all. Do you have an opinion about the injury itself or the lack thereof?
Well, first of all, I had the same thought as you. Is this a guy that's just fatigued? And you're talking about an event, one of his sponsors, right, in Texas. It's an important event for him to be at, but is that going to put him in a position to complete the career Grand Slam? Maybe it's just too much. And so I wondered that. Now, the reports that I heard from the PGA, and I did hear from a number of people with boots on the ground who had conversations with him and people in his camp, and it sounds like this was absolutely a very real injury, but I saw no evidence of it. So taking aside the conspiracy theories, which are fun to talk about, but putting those aside, I'm not all that worried about the wrist at this point. Yeah. And because of Jordan Spieth's record here, I am much more willing to take the risk. Again, we don't have the kind of big golf course we had last week at the PGA. The rough is Bermuda rough, which is a little bit much lighter. And it's only about 3 inches. It should be way less significant. And I'm very interested. I mean, look at his record here. It was tied 7th last year, 2nd the year before that, tied 10th the year before that in 2020 when he stood on the 14th tee with share of the lead before hitting it out of bounds. He was right in contention on Sunday. Tied 8th the year before that. Then it tied 32nd. Then a tied 2nd, then a win, then another tied 2nd, a tied 14th, a tied 7th. Every year he contends here. And I am much more willing, because I got to see a full week of Jordan Spieth last week, despite the wrist tape being on. I didn't see any grimaces. I didn't see any signs of pain. And I saw a performance that was maybe not great, but I mean, a T29 heading into a PGA at Oak Hill, probably fairly close to where I would have pegged Jordan Spieth with no injury talk.
Yeah. I mean, especially when it's funny, like the guys right next to him, Sam Burns and Sungjae Im, they missed the cut by a mile. And you take those 3 going into the PGA Championship, and your thought is, well, if one of those guys is going to completely bomb, it's got to be Jordan Spieth, because not only does he have an injury, but he probably hasn't practiced quite as much, and he's not in optimal shape to take down a tournament. And it was actually him that was, way better than Sungjae and Sam Burns. With that said, I'll tell you, I do like both of those guys. I do like Sam Burns and Sungjae Im. I don't know that I'm going to have a ton of shares of them, but I think it would be wise, if you're making a lot of lineups, to maybe include the upside, particularly of Sam Burns. Listen, we know he took down the tournament last year, but even if he didn't, I do see plenty of upside with Sam Burns. But I'll tell you, my favorite play in this 9K range is Justin Rose. And I'm not really a Justin Rose guy, but man, when you look at his numbers, it seems like he's just so perfect for this course. And that's partly because he's actually won here before in 2018 and had a 3rd place in 2020. But the weighted approach looks great. He's gained, by the way, on approach in 8 out of his last 9. He's got elite short game. Coming in with great form, made 6 cuts in a row, including a 6th at the Players, 16th at the Masters, and a 9th last week at the PGA Championship. So he's playing not only at an elite level, but he's playing elite fields at an elite level. And oh yeah, by the way, he won the AT&T Pebble Beach Pro-Am in early February. So the putting is great. So if you want to lean on that, there's no flaw I see with Justin Rose. And honestly, I think this number, I don't think it's disrespectful to Justin Rose because he's just not that name that gets the panache that like a Tony Finau is going to get for whatever reason. But I think you could put Justin Rose, looking at the metrics I'm looking at, I think you could put him at 10-1, and I'd be like, okay, whoever that name is next to these metrics, that person deserves to be 10-1. And that's how I feel about Justin Rose.
I think that's fair. And look, the other thing is if you're looking at one area that has been weak of late, it would be his strokes gained off the tee. But a lot of that, in my opinion, comes from his distance. I do think he has control of the golf ball off the tee, and here that could play right into his hands. I wrote down 3 names in the 9K range. I wrote down Jordan Spieth, I wrote down Justin Rose, and I wrote down Tommy Fleetwood, the only guy we haven't gotten to yet. Tommy Fleetwood at 9,200. See, I'll tell you why I like him. I mean, you look at what he's done in the last 3 weeks across the board. It's a tied 15th at the RBC Heritage, a tied 5th at the Wells Fargo, a tied 18th at the PGA Championship. He's gained strokes in every category. It's a little too green to be the pale play of the week, but this is the kind of thing that we're seeing. It's an incredibly steady game. He's starting to really get it with his full swing. In the last couple of years when he's lost his full swing, his ball striking prowess, he's made up for it a lot with the short game and quite frankly improved his putting a lot as well. And now it seems like the ball striking is coming back to 2018 Tommy Fleetwood, and I don't think he's lost anything with the putter. So I'm very willing to play him as well at 9,200. Any other? I mean, we touched on quite a few names here. Anybody else in this range you think is worthy of a discussion?
Well, because this is a DFS show, I want to point out that people are going to look at Chris Kirk's name at 9,100 and they're going to be like, what's that doing there? Which, of course, is going to mean his ownership is going to be relatively low. I'm not super interested in playing Chris Kirk, but one thing to note, I don't think this 9K range is going to be hyper popular. In other words, I think it's going to be sort of flat across the board. But if we happen to see like everybody in double digits here, and then Chris Kirk is like 7%, I think that's something to consider, or maybe even less, something to consider for your DFS lineups, because he is a good course fit. He just doesn't have that pop that would warrant a $9,100 price tag.
Yeah, but he has not been playing poorly. He has not missed a cut since the Players. It's been pretty good across the board. No real glaring weaknesses. And again, a golf course where he's had some success, and I think it fits his shot shape. He likes to draw the ball. And this is a drawer's golf course. He's had some up and down success here. He's never missed a cut here. He's played basically every year since 2008. I guess he didn't play in 09 or 2010, but he's played here a lot and he's never missed a cut. I think the shot shape could benefit him. I wouldn't be afraid of Chris Kirk either, but I think that's all we have now for the 9K range. So we're going to jump down, get into the 8K range, and then get you some value. But first, we got to take a quick break and hear a word from our partners.
Get breaking news.
Big news coming out of the NFL today.
Highlights and instant reactions.
The largest final round comeback in Tour Championship history. We're down to the Final Four.
I just want to take time to analyze greatness.
Talk winners and losers with a guy who's already a big winner.
CBS Sports HQ. It's all sports all day long.
And we're back. Okay, Sia, time for the 8K range. I know you took off the I love the 9K t-shirt here this week. At least at your initial view, and partly because you love the 8K range. So we got names like Ricky Fowler on top. He's at 8,900. We have Russell Henley right beneath him at 8,800. Then Denny McCarthy, Cameron Davis, Tom Hoagie, Minwoo Lee, KH Lee, Brian Harmon, Steven Yeager, and Taylor Moore rounds out the 8K range. It's pretty attractive. This is a pretty nice range.
Yeah, and I think there are some guys in this range that aren't going to get a lot of attention, which I like, and I'm going to point those guys out right now. First of all, I like Ricky Fowler. I'm not in love with him like I have been over the last few weeks, and that's not because he missed the cut last week at the PGA Championship. I think he's a fine play. I'm curious to see if the industry just goes right back to him because he was popular last week, and he probably is going to be popular this week as well. A guy that I don't think is going to be super popular is Denny McCarthy. I kind of like him. Top 30 at the PGA Championship. Immediately prior to that, 3 top 25s. Weighted tee to green. He checks that box. Weighted approach. Greens in regulation look good. And we know he has a great short game. Accuracy and distance, certainly an issue for him. But, you can firmly put him in sort of that Chris Kirk category or some of the guys we're going to talk about in the 7K range where, you obviously can attack this course in several different ways. There's the Sam Burns way, there's the Jason Kokrak way, and then there's just the very conventional way. You just play positional golf and you dial in on approach and with the putter. So I like Denny at 8,700. Another unpopular name, I'm guessing, is going to be KH Lee at 8,300. 8,300. Now the catch with him, and part of the reason I think he's going to be relatively unpopular is his history here is pretty terrible. But he does check a lot of the boxes. And I am a guy who has sort of shifted away from history to a large degree. Now, listen, if somebody has a really good history, I want to see that. I'm going to factor it in. But if somebody has a bad history, I think I'm willing to veer away from, hey, I got to exclude him from my player pool if I'm seeing the metrics pop, because that is more important to me than anything. And KH Lee's been pretty good, and he checks a lot of the boxes as well. Weighted approach, greens in regulation. He can get a hot putter. I like him. One other play, Greg. I was going to say Steven Yeager, and I like Steven Yeager, but what really worries me about Yeager, on a course where putting's probably going to matter, he's lost with the putter in 11 out of the last 12. That's a staggering Kyle Stanley-ish type of stat. 11 of the last 12. Now you look at weighted tee to green, weighted approach, greens in regulation, distance, checks all of those boxes. I just don't know. Let's say I'm doing a main lineup. I don't want a guy who's lost 11 out of the last 12. If he lost 7 out of the last 12, okay, I'm willing to do that. But it's pretty bad. The guy that can get really hot with the putter that I really like, who had kind of a bad incident last week, or I should say 2 days ago, with his driver was Taylor Moore. And honestly, I don't think Taylor Moore is going to be super popular this week. He's 8,000. The ball striking we know is pretty great, other than last week, by the way. I mean, you take the PGA Championship out of it. The putter can get super hot over the last 24 rounds. He's third in the field with the putter. And I just think he's one of those guys that's going to get relatively overlooked that actually has some upside to potentially win this tournament if some of the guys at the top start to fall.
So I just want to give you an idea here, because you mentioned, I wrote down 4 names in this range that I really like. One was Fowler, and I was very curious to get your impressions on ownership. Because again, I'm with you. I think Fowler could have a bounce back week. Perhaps pressure of a major, affected him a little bit differently. He's not quite there yet. I could definitely see a great bounce back week for Ricky. If he's going to be popular, I'm fine to step aside. If he's not, I'm fine to play him. So the metrics, I guess, say yes on Fowler, but not enough where I'm willing to take him as chalk. Cam Davis, I was very curious to get your thoughts on. One, you should go shoot a 65 in the final round of a major, and it can draw a lot of attention. But the reason I wrote down Cam Davis is before the PGA even happened, he's a guy I have on my list for this event. He came in, I believe, tied 7th last year. And tied 7th here last year. But the really interesting thing is on some of the other course comps, which may surprise you, he plays really well. He plays really well at the RBC Heritage. He played really well at the Players. Some of these other positional style, less than driver, if you will, golf courses, a bomber like Cam Davis always seems to show up. So I loved what I saw out of him last week, and I think he's a valuable play. But my big question is, does 65 at the PGA on Sunday just draw all the eyes to Cam Davis? Does he turn into chalk?
That's a good question. I don't think so. I really don't think so. I think we have the benefit of this week, looking at each of the ranges, particularly like the 10, 9, and 8K range, outside of maybe Scotty Scheffler. I don't think we're going to see a super chalky guy. Like looking at this range, like at first blush, Ricky Fowler, like the industry is going to go back to him because they're sophisticated enough not to hold one tournament against them. Certainly not a major, the PGA Championship. I think Steven Yeager is going to be popular because people just like Steven Yeager, and he's finished just fine. And all the metrics other than the putter look really good. And I think it's really going to be spread out from there. I think Russell Henley, Taylor Moore might get a little bit of attention. And then, to your point, Cameron Davis might get a little bit of attention. But no, I don't think it's too chalky. And to your point, he wasn't somebody that I had on my list. But, the cool thing about Cameron Davis is we don't exactly know where the state of his game is yet because he's just been so erratic. But we've seen the signs, Greg, that like Cameron Davis, the one that we thought existed in like early 2022, we're seeing signs that guy is like who he was. But because not everybody is aligned with that, now we can get him at a good price at relatively low ownership, and he's got the upside to top 3, top 5 this tournament.
Or win. I think he has win equity, right? I mean, look at what he's done off the tee, which I'm putting a little more emphasis on this week, perhaps than you. But I love what he does off the tee. And he has gained strokes in every event this year since the American Express. But it's also been, if you look on rickrungood.com, it's been getting progressively darker and darker green. He's been gaining more and more strokes off the tee. Now you look at the approach play, which has been kind of, hanging around average. He's been losing a little bit here, gaining a little bit here. But in the last 3 weeks, he has 2 events where he gained, over 4 strokes approaching the green. And so there's that really big upside capability and potential. The putter has been cooperating, I would say. It's not perfect, it's not elite, but it's certainly been there. So I'm way in on Cam Davis, especially thinking that ownership isn't going to skyrocket because of that 65. All right, then I was also right there with you on KH Lee. So I wrote down Fowler, who I'm kind of thinking I'm pushing out now. Mm-hmm. Davis, who I think I'm circling twice now. KH Lee, who I also think I'm circling twice now. And I think Taylor Moore might be the most, I think this price is way too low. Yeah. I mean, it's funny, the psychology of things. Like he didn't have the best tournament, at the PGA Championship, although he made the cut. But just the idea, this is dumb, but the idea that he had 2 things. One, he has to know that he kind of went viral because him throwing the driver was everywhere on Twitter. And he's probably a little embarrassed about it. I think this is a really good opportunity for him to kind of pick himself up a little bit. But I also think the industry, they saw that. And I believe it or not, I think his ownership will be down 2 to 3 percentage points, further than it should be as a result of people seeing that. They just don't want to, subconsciously, they just don't want to be a part of that. I think Taylor Moore has tremendous upside. Tremendous upside. I mean, you speak of the driver, right? Which is what everybody's going to be looking at. This year, basically, only 2 events he's lost strokes off the tee in. The Genesis lost less than a shot. Last week, lost a little more than 2 at the PGA. You look at it, approach the green, he's shown the ability to gain 3, 4, 5 strokes in the blink of an eye. And putting, this is the opposite of Steven Yeager, right? It's 9 out of his last 10 events, he's gained strokes putting. Yeah. He is a guy who can win this tournament. Valspar, where he won earlier this year, I think you could make a course comparison to. It's maybe not as strong as the RBC Heritage for one, or Waialae at the Sony Open, but I think there's a pretty strong correlation between the Valspar and this. So I love Taylor Moore. I think he's way underpriced, and so that would be, I think there's 3 really good plays in that 8K range in Davis, Lee, and Moore. Anybody else in the 8Ks you want to mention, or you want to move on to the 7s?
Yeah, I think we can move on. I don't have any intention of playing Brian Harman. That's just kind of a Sia thing. If you want to play Brian Harman, he does appear to be a good course fit. Minwoo Lee, I think there's some upside there. Not interested. Tom Hoge just hasn't shown me enough relative to some of the guys that I do want to play in this range. And I don't think his history is very good here. As I punch it up, it's actually quite bad.
It's bad. Should be good, so you would think, right?
You would think it would be good. but it's simply not. And frankly, he hasn't been very good lately either. And Hoagie always gets some attention because we know he can be dialed in with the iron. So it's not like you're going to get an amazing ownership discount on Tom Hoagie because he's a big enough name where he's going to get some ownership. So it's a no for me on pretty much everybody else.
Okay. So we'll move on. I think we're on the same page in the 8K range. 7K range is a pretty big range here. And I think it's full of value. So I won't read all the names, but I'll just read a few. It's headlined by Ben On and Kurt Kitayama at 7,900. You got Brendan Todd and Harris English right below them at 7,800. Go down to the middle portion of that range. You got a Davis Riley, Thomas Dietrich, Adam Svensson, Hayden Buckley in that 7,300 range. Eric Cole at 7,200. And then we get down to the lower end of the 7K range, and you got Sepp Straka at a great PGA championship, Vincent Norman, who's been playing some great golf, and you got a Will Gordon, who always seems to be a popular fantasy play, especially at this price. So who jumps out to you? Where are you starting in the 7K?
There's 3 or 4 names that I really like and a couple that I'm a little undecided on. So I'm curious if we have any crossover here, Greg, but I'm going to start with a guy I liked at the Byron Nelson, and it was and he was good. It was Christian Bezuidenhout at 7,700. Coming off a miscut at the PGA Championship. Prior to that, was pretty great. 15th here last year as well. Off the tee is going to be his issue, but he's been incredible on approach. He's top 10 again, only 24 rounds, top 10 weighted approach in this field. So the approach is pretty incredible. He's gained over 5. He gained over 5 on approach last year. So that's how he got it done last year at this very tournament. He gained on approach and he gained with the putter in a big way. He gave a few back around the green, but I think he's a really savvy play. I think he'll be really good just sort of playing positional golf. I was talking to David Bileski earlier today, and unprompted, he brought this name up. By the way, David is the guy who's our first cut lyricist for the songs, just as a reminder there for everybody. But he's a sharp guy. He's on CBEZ as well. I like him. One other name you mentioned, I'm going to go to him next. It's Hayden Buckley. I like Hayden Buckley. He's fun to look at. It's fun to look at. The only issue is it's funny because when you say it's fun to look at, it is fun because what you see off the tee is green. What you see on approach is green. What you see with the putter is green. But what you see with around the green it's sunglasses red. Like it is, you got to put your hand up. It is going to shine right in your face. And it's one of those things where I think I'm willing to take the chance on Hayden Buckley's lack of around the green play because I'm at least getting the putter with him. I'm not getting both that are bad. And frankly, he's been such a good ball striker that hopefully he just doesn't find him in those trouble spots. And so, around the green, I've said this before, it does to me tend to be like kind of like a random stat. And, it's encompassed in the weighted tee to green that I already look at. Either way, I really like Hayden Buckley. Before I get to a couple others, though, it sounds like you like him as well.
Well, I'm very interested with the off the tee performance. I think that's going to put him in position. Short game, I find to be a difficult thing to predict at Colonial because on one side of the coin, it's fairly flat. There's not a lot of extremely severe runoff areas. The bunkers are not, extremely challenging or deep. However, at the same time, these greens can be kind of hard to hit, especially if it's firm and fast like it was last year. You don't see, this is not like the AT&T Byron Nelson where guys are going to be hitting 60 greens in regulation. You're just not going to see that. It's a little bit more challenging. So I think short game gets a little bit more emphasis here, but I don't think it's all that difficult. And so when I see somebody like Hayden Buckley, I throw up a big question mark, and I wonder. I tend to like it. I tend to lean more towards, a great driver of the golf ball, a great ball striker. I think they are more likely to overcome that. I'm lukewarm on them. I certainly love the price. That's a big deal for me.
So, and that's the thing in this low 7K range, there are so many good options. And that's really good news for taking a stand on somebody, because it'd be one thing if like last week, there were a lot of good options, don't get me wrong, but people sort of were fixated on one or two players that were like kind of the quote obvious plays. Like Gary Woodland was one of them at 7,100, who of course missed the cut, but he was one of those guys where it's like, well, if I'm going to go down that low, like Gary Woodland makes a lot of sense. Hopefully he gets the putter going. Love all the ball striking. Well, in the low 7K range, there are so many good names. For example, Adam Svensson, I think, is a pretty good name. We're seeing good off the tee play from him in the last couple tournaments. The approach has been kind of bad, actually, but I don't worry about that with Svensson because I've seen him just light it up on approach before, and he's been great with the putter. Weighted tee to green looks good for him. Another guy, Eric Cole at 7,200. Weighted tee to green looks great, gaining everywhere. Accuracy, greens in regulation, not great, so that's an issue for him. But I think he's a solid play with upside. We've seen that from him, particularly over the last 4 tournaments.
From Buckley. He's my pivot from Buckley. If you're worried about the around the green play, I think you go to Cole.
Fair enough.
Because you've seen great finishes out of him, but the difference is, he's gained over 2.5 strokes in his last 3 events around the green. So if that's something you're really worried about, you get a lot of the same. He's not quite as a lead off the tee as Hayden Buckley, but certainly makes up for it around the greens, which I think could be important.
Yeah, and Greg, by the way, it turns out Adam Svensson's not going to be a good play because Zach and Don Mattingly, right? Reminding me that Svensson decided he wasn't going to play. Hopefully that's not an injury, but Svensson has withdrawn. So my bad on that. So Svensson not going to be the play, but let me name 2 other guys in the low 7K range that I think are playable. One is Joseph Bramlett. I mean, I've been on this guy for quite some time. He rates out really well across the board in the metrics that I'm looking at. Sam Stevens is really interesting to me. The putter has been bad. I mean, we're talking like Steven Yeager bad, where he's lost in 6 of the last 7, kind of in a big way. I'm not saying I'm willing to overlook that, but other than that, he's got a ton of distance. If you're looking at that, greens in regulation are great. Ball striking is great. The short game has the issues, especially with the putter. But I think at 7,100, I'd be more willing to take a chance on him than, let's say, a Yeager, for example, who's going to be A, more popular and B, more expensive.
Okay, I got another guy I got to throw at you. Low 7K range, as low as it gets. Vincent Norman.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts? I'm looking at this saying, is it too good to be true? Am I walking into a trap here? I think the last 2 events, he's gained strokes everywhere, and at the Zurich Classic came and tied 9th, of course, in a team event. It seems like he's really found something, and I like what I'm seeing.
I totally agree. And at 7K flat, he makes a lot of sense. I mean, this is one of those fields where you're looking for your low 7K guy to have the upside to finish, top 20. But like a guy like Vincent Norman, I think in this field could finish top 15, top 10 potentially. And so that's what I'm looking for. And Norman's proving it with the finishing positions that he can get it done on a Sunday and close strong. So that's a great play. I'm surprised I didn't have him on my list.
All right. One other guy I had on my list in the low 7K range, and that's Ryan Palmer. That when you go to Texas, Ryan Palmer is a smart play. So one, you think Ryan Palmer is going to be chalk, and 2, this seems like something that's kind of been developing a little bit. I mean, he missed cuts in 4 straight events before finishing tied 35th at the Wells Fargo, tied 8th at the Byron Nelson. He's been driving the ball great, which I think is really important here. He's been hitting the ball a lot better. And definitely at the AT&T Byron Nelson, he spoke about his increasing confidence on the greens. What do you think about Ryan Palmer here?
And that's really what I was going to ask. It was about the greens, because my main issue with him, I mean, he's volatile even outside of the greens, of course, but my main issue is that the putter has been really bad. And as I look at the alleged progress, I mean, yeah, you're right. At the AT&T Byron Nelson, he almost gained a full stroke. That's pretty good. But boy, prior to that, it's just a pretty bad scene. And so I this is one of those cases where, did he find something? Like, I didn't know that he spoke to being comfortable on the greens, Greg. If he has suggested that he's changed something or found something, I think that is pretty good evidence that gaining a stroke might be leading to gaining another stroke in the next tournament, and so on and so forth. He's back in Texas. I do like him. I think he's got upside. He's not my favorite play in the 7K range, but he's somebody I looked at for sure.
He's got a couple of top 5s here at this event, and he's played a bunch. So you've seen some real up and downs, and he has putted quite nicely on the greens here. There was a stretch for about 4 years where he was really struggling. But in his last 2 starts here, he gained 3.96 strokes putting and 2.48 strokes putting, and early in his career, and maybe his first 10 events or so, he had some really good putting performances as well. So I do like Ryan Palmer a lot. I think he's, but again, there's so many names here. So before we get to the 6K range and the value, towards the top of the 7K range, is there anybody you like? How do you feel about a Brendan Todd or a Harris English? Maybe an Emiliano Grillo or Alex Smalley, someone like that.
Yeah, I looked at English, but to be honest with you, Grillo, I liked quite a bit. I'm willing to go right back in on Emiliano Grillo. I looked at Spawn as well. I came off of that. I came off of Smalley. I think Ryan Fox and Patrick Rogers are interesting guys who we might be able to see take advantage of actually some distance, kind of cutting off some of those dog legs and really putting themselves in a position with their second shot. So I think both of those guys are interesting to speculate on. Outside of that, and that's like right at 7,500. I don't, Kitayama's interesting as well. Putting back-to-back great tournaments together, I guess in this field, it's certainly possible. For me, in the 7,500 and above range, I think my two favorite are probably Grillo and Kitayama.
Okay. Well, there's certainly upside with those guys. No question about that. I think I would have to go with English. I have a good feeling about him. It's hard to talk about the metrics with English. I feel like something's coming on with him. And I would say Patrick Rogers would be the other guy for me. I get the sense that Patrick Rogers has something brewing. We've seen some great iron play performances out of him so far this year, and some really strong finishes that have been kind of bouncing back and forth. And the T29 at the PGA, it's a great finish for him.
It is
in this event,
and 14th at the at this event in 2020.
Yeah. So I think there's a real potential for Patrick Rogers to get something going here. All right, let's get to a little value here, because we got a 6K range, and I want to see how low you're willing to go, because I think there's a lot of guys here that you can choose between and take a shot at. So who do you like in the 6K range?
So there's three guys, maybe four, that I really have my eye on, but I'm going to say five names, because the first name I'm going to say, I say him pretty much every tournament. And so it would be weird if in this field I did, not that it's a terrible field, but I do think this guy has value. Ben Martin at 6,800. He slipped at the Wells Fargo, but otherwise he's been great with the ball striking. Some checkered short game, but he can flash there. I think Ben Martin has some upside in this range. Dylan Wu, speaking of upside, I mean, all he does for the most part is finish well. He'll get cut. He'll find a cut here and there, but I'm looking for a great approach. I'm looking for good enough short game. And at 6,600, Dylan Wu checks that box for me. So I think he has value. Now let's go to Kevin Streelman, a guy that I don't think I've even mentioned in, 3 years, maybe?
Yeah.
How long have I been on this show? Maybe I've never.
It's
almost 3 years.
3 years.
It's almost 3 years.
He must have come up at Pebble Beach or something.
Yeah, but he's just been so bad as of, a year and it's been a while. So the ball striking does appear to maybe be back. The around the green game is great. The putter can be an issue, but he's got decent history here. In terms of weighted tee to green in the 6K range, he's the best guy here last 24 rounds. By the way, if you're just wondering what that list looks like, again, last 24 rounds, weighted tee to green, it's Streelman, Akshay Bhatia, of course, Carson Young, Schenk, Higo, Sig, Hubbard, Walker, Willett, Ben Martin, Robbie Shelton, and Dylan Wu. Carson Young's the next guy. I've been on him pretty much every tournament he's played over the last 5 tournaments, and at 6,300, that's just too low. He should be 6,900.
Ridiculous.
Michael Block is 6,900 and Carson Young is 6,300. And that's not me disparaging Michael Block, but Carson Young has proven it for 4 or 5 tournaments in a row, or at least 4 out of 5 tournaments. And the one tournament he missed the cut, it was on the number, I believe. He's been so solid with the approach game, tee to green. He looks pretty good. The putter can be an issue here and there, but 6,300, I'll roll the dice there.
Yeah, he actually at the Wells Fargo missed the cut and gained strokes total, which is amazing. A very rare thing and very hard to do. He's gained strokes approaching the green in his last 4 and putting in his last 4 as well. So Carson Young was kind of in the how low can you go game. He was a guy for me. I'll throw a couple more names out there. I'm very curious about Scott Piercy. He seems to be You know what? He's at 6,400. He's the bland play of the week. And we haven't done that in a long time.
Nice.
But you look at his numbers and they're very middling across the board, very consistent. We saw a T19 at the AT&T Byron Nelson. You look at some of his history here, and there's T7. It's way back in 2017. T19 back in 2019. He's made the cut here a lot. Although in his last 2 starts, it hasn't gone very well. But I wouldn't be afraid of a Scott Piercy at 6,400 either. Let's see. I love the Dylan Wu play. Anybody up top? What do you think about? I just want to ask you about Chez Reavie because I wrote his name down too.
That's interesting. I mean, he's been pretty good. Speaking of guys that may have, like Streelman, for example, that may have found something. I don't mind Reavie, and he certainly seems like a good course fit. Not somebody I really looked at too hard, but I think he's okay. It's a fine play. His approach play has been great. Off the tee play, not so much, but I mean, he has gained 1.95 strokes or more putting in his last 5 events. And that's, and we're talking about Shea Rivet here, right? That's not typical for him. So I have his name circled. I'm very curious. When anytime, pretty much any golf course, unless we get to a major championship venue where you're going to have a big beast of a golf course and really long rough, if I see some recent success approach the green and putting combined, I mean, I'm licking my chops. That is where you go. That's how you make birdies. And I see that in our friend Chez Reavie here. So that would be, I guess, the last name I'd mention here in the 6Ks. I've got 2 others. One is David Lingmuth that I think is interesting if you have to go down to 6,200 because you're building some elite lineup at the top. But I want to ask you about one other player. Because if you look at his strokes gained metrics over his last 3 tournaments, well, we only have 2 measured events for him, but they're all pretty good. I mean, strokes gained total, he's gaining. In fact, he's gained, well, we know because we don't have the individual strokes gained metrics, but we know he's gained in terms of strokes gained total in 3 tournaments in a row in a pretty significant way. He was 27th here last year. He's made 3 cuts in a row, and he's 6,300. Without me saying that person's name, you'd be intrigued by that, right? I would be intrigued by that. Do you know who I'm talking about? It's not Carson Young. And would it be Pearson Coody? No, good guess. No, he missed 3 cuts in a row. Go ahead. Hit me. Chad Ramey. PGA Tour winner. I don't know what to say. I don't want to say like he's found something. He's some elite guy. I don't even put him in the Carson Young category, but I mean, he's doing things. He's made 3 cuts in a row and he's 6,300 in a slightly watered down field. And that includes the top 10 at the Zurich Classic. I mean, that's not saying a ton, but still. He's a PGA Tour champion. So I'd be willing to go that way. I mean, at 6,300, if you were not going to go with, Carson Young, I think you could go with Kevin Tway as well. I think he's a very playable option. Again, not in love with him, but there's been a lot of missed cuts. It's a risky play, but he did finish tied 11th at the AT&T Byron Nelson, and the numbers aren't as bad as the results. So I'd be okay there too. Man, Callum Tarrant. I see that name and I get excited, and then I look and it's like it's gotten a little better. T29 at the PGA. But man, I expected big things for him this year, and it just has not materialized. Maybe he's had some big weekends because he hasn't been playing a lot of golf on the weekends. So, I mean, it just has not. He's so much better than that, and I hope he turns it around. But anyway, anybody else, Sia, or can we get to some narrative lineups? I think that's it. I think we can get to some narrative. By the way, we had so many submissions, and I typically we only want to kind of put like 4 or 5 up there. So we have 4 up here. So for a few of you that got shut out, please submit next week, and I'll make sure you get up there. But not only did we have so many submissions, they were all really, really good. So this is good stuff. All right, let's see. Can we pull? Yeah, here we go. All right. So we have Rebecca O'Connor. Colonial Country Club, founded in 1936. A few other historic moments from 1936.
Roosevelt, Justin Rose, reelected. Rural Electrification Caution Act established. Rural what is that? Electrocution?
I actually
Act
don't know what
established?
that is.
I don't know what act
is that
that is.
Cation?
Electrification
Act, maybe?
All right, well, that's Tony Finau. We have the Spanish Civil War. That's a good one. JJ Spawn. Hyndon Burns takes first flight. Oh, how about that?
That's solid.
Gone with the WMD published. Gone with the Wind. But, of course, the IN is substituted for Im. Sung J Im. And the Hoover Dahmen was completed. That's pretty good.
Great. We got a history lesson and some great wordplay. Good job.
Yeah. Yeah, I got to work on the history side of things a little bit there. And I guess that means the wordplay things too. Next, Ryan Hickey, the Fantasy Bunker. Fort Worth is still the only city with real cowboys still on payroll. A few of my favorite movies featuring cowboys. Wild Wild Westmoreland are pretty good. What is that? Akshanghai Noon? I don't know that movie.
Shanghai Noon.
Shanghai Noon. Okay. The Three He Goes. Pretty good. I like that one. The Poseidon Outlaw, Joey Wales. There you go. Poseidon Out. The Good, the Badly, and the Ugly. Very clever. And the Magnificent 7. Okay.
Your boy Vincent Norman
Vincent Norman. Yeah, he's a good play. That's good. That's really good. Okay, next page. Now we have the Model Maniac. Every week submission from the
pretty
Model
much an
Maniac.
every week submission.
Yeah, a regular. Okay, everything is bigger and better in Texas. Golfers, had they grown up in Texas, hashtag SG narrative. That's helpful, by the way. Min Woo Lee, Max Woo Lee, Taylor Moore, Taylor Most, Ryan Fox, Ryan Bobcat, Cole Hammer, Cole Sledgehammer, Harris English, Harris Dallas, Alex Smalley, Alex Massively. Wow, that's pretty good.
Bigger and better indeed.
Bigger and better. Hopefully our lineups are too this week. John Markowski, the man, the myth, the legend.
Mm-hmm.
Charles Schwab manages money. Songs about money on my playlist. Taylor, Mo Money, Mo Problems. It's all about the Ben Griffins. The Ben Griffins. I like that. Eric, not saying she a coal digger. Kurt, Kitty, a material girl. Oh, I like that. Wow. I'm surprised to hear that's on your playlist. Quite a song, though. I want to be a Billy on air, Horschel, which he admits is not his best. But I actually like it. A billionaire. And Can't Ray Me Love.
Strong.
It's strong. This people are so creative. I can't.
They are. Over. And again, there were a few more that were equally as creative, but Greg, I didn't want to put you through that. There's a lot of a word scramble there. So you did great. I can't believe you got the Material Girl one. I thought you were stumbling on that one. I was waiting for it.
Well, it's fun and it's a great exercise for me and encourages me to practice reading, which is something I think you should do every day. I think you should try to read something every day. But that is here nor there, because I think we have gotten into this entire lineup, the entire slate here for the Charles Schwab Challenge DFS. And we got a lot of names in today, Sia.
We did get a lot of names in. I thought the analysis was great. And I noticed there was somebody in the chat, Greg, I think it was maybe Zach Phelps, that was like, this is my first time watching this show. I didn't know you guys went so much in depth. And which I take as a compliment, of course. But yeah, that's what the First Cut does, not just on Mondays, but throughout the week. So you got to check us out, Zach. Thanks for checking in today.
You know, Zach, the challenge for us is not going too in depth, Because look, we're golf nerds. We can go way into the weeds, especially when Rick is here. I mean, Rick, the one thing I'll say is he's always holding back. He's always got more in the tank. That's our biggest challenge. But I'm glad you enjoyed it. And I hope that everybody has great success this week with your DFS lineup for the Charles Schwab Challenge. Sia, before we go, any final words?
Well, don't treat this week like any other week. Well, what I should say is don't treat this week like any other week after a major. That the contests are amazing. The prize money is amazing. That doesn't mean you need to unload the bankroll, but just because we just had a major last week, it doesn't make this any less exciting. I genuinely can't wait for this tournament. And I hope everybody's as excited for DFS as we are.
Yeah, it really turned out to be a great field. So we'll be keeping our eye on it. First cut is at you pretty much every day the rest of the week. We got tomorrow, we have the mega preview pod. That's at 5 Eastern, or at least it's scheduled to be. And then Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, we have our round by round recaps as well. So make sure you tune in for all of that. Give us a like and a subscribe. That always helps. And I hope everybody enjoys the Monday. I hope you enjoy creating your lineups. And until next time, Sia, big thanks to you. You can find Sia Nejad on Twitter at Sia Nejad. I'm Greg DuCharme. You can find me on Twitter at TheRealGFD. Big thanks to producer Troy for all of his hard work putting this show together. And of course, as always, producer Josh as well. So big thanks to all of those who helped put this podcast together. But until next time, that's all we have for you.